The NBA season is now underway, and when the NBA season kicks off, it gets me thinking about all sorts of things that I'm going to be fascinated with throughout the season. And one of the things that always interests me is just how quickly things change. GMs do their best to set up teams for sustained success with long term projections and plans. Teams that trend in the right direction or get good young talent tend to think of themselves as set up for the next decade. But that's a lifetime in the NBA, and things are rarely that dependable. A little over a year ago, I made a video pointing out how much the NBA had changed in 5 years by showing how many of the award winners and other notable players from 5 seasons prior had changed teams over that span of time. Well, this time I decided to do a deep dive and focus not so much on how much things have changed, but just how much have they stayed the same. I have to say that it was about as bleak as I expected. Not a single team in the league can put together an entire five-man lineup of players who have been with the franchise for 5 years. Let's run through a breakdown of the various groups. There are 3 teams that don't have any players that have been with their roster for 5 years. Those teams are the Detroit Pistons, the Houston Rockets, and the Washington Wizards. Technically, Jeff Green was with the Rockets 5 years ago, but he spent time with 2 other teams between then and now, including winning a title with Denver. On the high end of things, there are 6 teams that have 4 players that have been with their franchise for 5 years. Would you guess that these are the teams that have had the most roster stability over the last 5 years? The Denver Nuggets, the Golden State Warriors, the Los Angeles Clippers, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Miami Heat, and the Milwaukee Bucks. Let's break down what each of those teams has remaining. The Denver Nuggets have retained Nikola Jokic, 3-time MVP, his Robin, Jamal Murray, their young X Factor, who's not so young anymore, Michael Porter Jr., and of course, the one everybody would have guessed, Vlatko Konchar. The Warriors still have 4 champions on their team: Stephen Curry, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, and Andrew Wiggins. The Clippers still retain Kawhi Leonard, when he's actually playing, Ivica Zubac, Terrence Mann, and Amir Coffey. Probably not the 4 that they were anticipating keeping for 4 years. The Grizzlies still have Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark, and John Konchar. The Miami Heat have retained Jimmy Butler, at least for this year, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, as much as they tried to trade him for Damian Lillard, and Duncan Robinson. The Milwaukee Bucks also still have 4 champions on their roster: Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, and Pat Connaughton. There's only one team that has 3 players remaining on their roster from 5 years ago, and that team is the Dallas Mavericks. And those players are, of course, Luka Doncic, Maxi Kleber, and everybody's favorite Mav, Dwight Powell. Next up, we're going to go through the 9 teams that have 2 players remaining on their roster. Some of these are very obvious, some of these are a little trickier. Let's see how many you can guess. First up is the Atlanta Hawks. The 2 on their roster are Trae Young and DeAndre Hunter. The Boston Celtics have a very obvious duo, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. The Charlotte Hornets' 2 remaining may be a little tougher to guess, Cody Martin and Miles Bridges. The Chicago Bulls have Zach LaVine, who they really didn't want to have back, and Kobe White. The Cleveland Cavaliers, Darius Garland, you might have guessed. I'm betting less people would think of Dean Wade. And bonus points if you remember Tristan Thompson is on both rosters, but he had stops in Boston, Sacramento, Indiana, and Chicago in between. The Indiana Pacers have Miles Turner and TJ McConnell. The Los Angeles Lakers, like the Celtics, have an easy duo to guess. It's LeBron James and Anthony Davis. The New Orleans Pelicans also have a pretty obvious duo, Zion Williamson, and Brandon Ingram. And lastly, for this category, the Oklahoma City Thunder have their MVP candidate, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and their defensive stopper, Lou Dort. And now we arrive at our final category, which is NBA teams with only one player remaining on their roster from 5 years ago. There are 11 teams that fit this category. Once again, let's see how you can do guessing who these players are. For the Brooklyn Nets, their one player they retained is center Nick Claxton. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, they also retained center Naz Reid. For the New York Knicks, we're continuing a trend here. Center Mitchell Robinson. For the Orlando Magic, Jonathan Isaac. For the Philadelphia 76ers, the process himself, Joel Embiid. For the Phoenix Suns, Devin Booker. For the Portland Trailblazers, Anthony Simons. For the Sacramento Kings, De'Aaron Swipa the Fox. They also still have Alex Len, but he had stops in Toronto and Washington. The San Antonio Spurs still have Keldon Johnson. The Toronto Raptors, if you can guess this, you're really into basketball, have Chris Boucher. And the Utah Jazz still have former Sixth Man of the Year award winner Jordan Clarkson. Hopefully you enjoyed this exercise of running through each team's players with 5+ years of tenure. But ultimately, what does it matter? What does any of this mean? Well, as I've said before, being a GM in the NBA is a hard job, and long-term planning rarely goes like we think. Here are some summary statistics of what we just looked at. 56 players have remained with their team for at least the last 5 years. That's an average of just under 2 per team. 12 of those were just entering their rookie season, which means that the other 48 players drafted didn't make it 5 years with their team, including 8 of 14 lottery picks. Considering about 500 players play in the NBA each season, that is a mere 11.2% rate of continuity across the league in just a 5-year span. So I guess the lesson is, enjoy your team for what it is now, because we don't have any idea what our team is going to look like, let alone the entire league 5 years from now.